I have thought about that night many times since. If I could map the turning points of my life, the moment the river of it was diverted by a single, unmovable stone, it would be then. It wasn't the decision itself, which felt less like a choice and more like the last resort of a drowning woman. It was the silence that followed it. A silence with weight and texture. A silence that cost more than the debt I went there to settle. The first thing I heard wasn't his voice. It was the absence of all other sound. The 28th floor of the Kyobo Tower was a vacuum. The carpet, a gray so deep it was almost black, absorbed every footstep like a secret. Even the air seemed buffered, insulated from the city that glittered like a shattered galaxy below. I had counted the elevator's ascent. 28 floors in 41 seconds. A man who looked like he was carved from the same granite as the building's lobby, all sharp angles and quiet menace, had led me down a hall. He did not speak. His name, I would learn later, was Mr. Choi. At the time, he was just a suit and a silence that amplified my own frantic pulse. He stopped at a set of double doors made of a dark, unmarked wood. He opened one, a gesture that was neither welcoming nor dismissive, and simply waited. I walked past him. The room was not an office. It was a life, curated into stillness. Bookshelves climbed to the ceiling, filled with books that looked red, their spines softened. A low table of black marble held a single, perfect white orchid in a simple ceramic pot. And by the vast window, a man stood looking out at the indifferent lights of Seoul. Kang Dae-hyun. His name was a whisper in the circles my ex-boyfriend had disastrously tried to enter. A ghost story told by men who thought themselves predators, only to find a truer, quieter one in their midst. He didn't turn when I entered. The room reorganized itself around his stillness anyway. I felt like an interruption, a sudden noise in a library. I waited. I counted my breaths. I counted the seconds. At 1 minute and 12 seconds, he turned. He was younger than the legends suggested. Not yet 30. There was no visible cruelty in his face, only a profound and unnerving composure. His features were clean, sharp, like a sketch that had been pared down to its most essential lines. He wore a simple black sweater of a material so fine it seemed to drink the low, amber light. He looked at me, and his gaze was not insulting or leering. It was worse. It was assessing, like a jeweler examining a stone for its flaws. I am fine, I had practiced saying. I am here to discuss a business matter. I had a whole speech rehearsed, a plea for mercy dressed up as a proposal. It all evaporated under that quiet, steady gaze. The debt was not mine, not really. It belonged to Ji-hoon, the man I had once thought I would marry, a man who mistook recklessness for ambition. He had borrowed from his father's associates, men with soft hands and hard eyes, and when he couldn't pay, he had simply disappeared, leaving my name on a dotted line I barely remembered signing. A guarantee. A testament to a love I had tragically misplaced. These men were not sentimental. They had taken my small flower shop apart, not with violence, but with a chilling bureaucratic precision. Lien. Seizures. Threats delivered in polite, level tones. My old life was being dismantled board by board. Kang Dae-hyun, they had said, was the only one their boss feared. A word from him and the debt would vanish. But a word from Kang Dae-hyun was not a thing one simply asked for. It had to be bought. He finally spoke. His voice was low, devoid of inflection. You are on Mina. A statement, not a question. Yes. My own voice was a stranger's, thin and dry. You have a debt with Mr. Park. It is 68 million won. The precision was another kind of threat. I know. He gestured to the chair opposite the low table. He said. My hands were trembling, so I clasped them in my lap, digging my nails into my palms. I felt the small, sharp pain as a grounding force. He remained standing, a column of shadow against the glittering city. Mr. Park is a sentimental man. He believes debts of honor must be paid with something other than money. I told myself I was ready for this. I told myself I had accepted the cost. I knew even as I thought it that I was lying. There is a way to resolve this. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held mine. He was not looking at my body, not in the way other men did. He was looking at my face, at the fear I was failing to hide. He was reading the story of my desperation. One night, the words hung in the air between us, as solid and cold as the marble of the table. The debt is cleared. Mr. Park will receive a payment, and he will be told the matter is concluded. It will be concluded. There was no room for argument in that final declarative statement. He was not offering a negotiation. He was stating the terms of my surrender. I should have felt rage. I should have felt humiliated. I felt a strange, terrifying calm. The calm of a person who has fallen from a great height and is no longer struggling against the inevitable. I thought of my little shop, the scent of earth and eucalyptus, the buckets of delphiniums and pale roses. I thought of my friend Lena, who kept calling, her voice tight with a worry I could not soothe. I thought of the life I had tried to build, a small, quiet, orderly thing. It was already gone. This was just the final bill. My throat was tight. I could only nod. He watched the motion, a flicker of something in his eyes too quick to name, an almost smile that was gone before it could be confirmed. He walked to a door I hadn't noticed, set flush against a paneled wall. He opened it. This way. It led not to a bedroom but to another elevator, smaller, private. The ride was silent. 3 floors up. The doors opened directly into a penthouse that was even more spare and silent than the office below. The same dark wood, the same gray stone, the same window looking out onto the same indifferent city. He didn't speak again. He walked to a bar and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy glass. He did not offer me any. He just stood there, watching me as I stood in the center of the vast, empty room, a piece of furniture that hadn't yet been assigned a place. The silence stretched. I counted to 100. Then I stopped counting. It was his world. I was just living in it. For one night. The thing about silence is that it has texture. The silence in his office had been smooth, polished, like the surface of the marble table. Up here in the penthouse it was different. It was denser, heavier. It was a silence made of unspoken things, of a life lived behind invisible walls. I stood in the middle of the living area for what felt like an hour. It was probably only 10 minutes. I am good at counting. It is a skill one learns when waiting for things to be over. He drank his whiskey slowly, his back to the window, the city lights catching in the glass. He watched me over the rim. It was the most unnerving surveillance I had ever been under. There was nothing predatory in it, and that was the problem. It was curious. It was attentive. I told myself it was a performance of power, a way to remind me of my position. I was a transaction, a line item on a ledger that was about to be closed. Finally, I couldn't bear it anymore. The stillness, the waiting, my own powerlessness. I spoke, and my voice cracked the silence like a stone hitting ice. What now? He lowered the glass, placing it on the bar with a soft, definitive click. He didn't answer immediately. He just looked at me, his head tilted slightly. 2 seconds passed. 3. Then a question so unexpected it completely disarmed me. What is your favorite flower? I stared at him. Of all the things I had braced myself for, this was not one of them. I had expected orders or dismissal or a cold physical claiming. Not this. Not a conversation. My mind went blank. The names of 1,000 flowers I had handled, arranged, and sold simply vanished. I don't know. A lie. I knew exactly. It was the ghost orchid. A strange, rootless epiphyte that clings to trees, its pale, spectral flowers seeming to float in the humid air. Rare, difficult, dependent, and yet fiercely wild. I couldn't say that to him. It felt too much like naming myself. He seemed to know it was a lie. That almost smile flickered again, a ghost of its own. He walked towards me, and I flinched, a small, involuntary tightening of my shoulders. I willed myself to stand still. He stopped a few feet away. He didn't reach for me. There is a shower through there. His voice was quiet. There are clothes. Whatever you need. He indicated a hallway I hadn't noticed. A dark slash in a wall of dark wood. I will be in the study. The implication was clear. I was to prepare myself. I walked down the hall, my legs unsteady. Each footstep was swallowed by the thick rug. The hall opened into a bedroom that was as austere as the rest of the apartment. A large, low bed, dressed in crisp white linens. A single piece of art on the wall. A swirl of black ink on white paper that looked like a storm cloud. And beyond it, a bathroom tiled in gray slate. On a bench inside, there was a stack of folded clothes. A simple silk robe, a soft t-shirt and lounge pants. All new. All in my size. The discovery of his knowledge of my size was a small, sharp shock. It was a reminder of the depth of his resources, the quiet, effortless way he had gathered information about me. I was not a stranger to him. I was a project. I showered. I let the hot water run over my skin for a long time, trying to wash away the fear, the city, the last few weeks of my life. I told myself it was just a body, a thing I could dissociate from. I had survived worse things than this. It was another lie, but a necessary one. When I emerged, wrapped in the impossibly soft robe, the penthouse was even quieter than before. The door to the study was closed. The city lights were the only illumination, casting long, geometric shadows across the floor. I waited. The silence was a physical presence now, a blanket I couldn't shrug off. After 11 minutes, the study door opened. He walked out, and he had changed as well, into a simple black t-shirt and dark pants that mirrored the clothes left for me. He looked less like a crime lord and more like a man at the end of a long day. He walked not to me, but to a panel on the wall. He touched it, and a section of the window slid open with a faint hiss, letting in the cool night air and the distant, muted roar of Seoul. "The air smells of rain," he said. "It will rain before morning." He stood by the open window, one hand resting on the frame. He was giving me space. He was letting me breathe. The unexpected courtesy was more unnerving than any command would have been. I finally found my voice again. "Why did you ask me that? About the flower?" He turned his head, looking at me. His expression was unreadable in the half-light. "I wanted to know," he said simply, as if it were the most natural question in the world. He walked over to the bed and pulled back the white duvet. He didn't look at me as he did it. He just straightened the pillows, his movements economical and precise. Then he sat on the edge of the bed, his back to me. "The choice is yours," he said, his voice so low I almost didn't hear it. "You can sleep here, or in the guest room. The debt is cleared regardless." This was the moment, the pivot. He was offering me an out, a way to keep some piece of myself. I could take it. I could walk away, sleep in a separate room, and leave in the morning with my freedom bought and my body untouched. All it would cost me was my pride. I would be accepting his charity. I thought of Mr. Park. I thought of the way Kang Dae-hyun had said, "It will be concluded." He wasn't just paying a debt. He was issuing a warning. He was drawing a line around me. This strange, quiet night, this bizarre pantomime of courtesy, it wasn't about sex. It was about ownership. A transaction had to be completed. A claim had to be staked. For his word to have weight, the story had to be true. He had to take the payment he had named. I walked towards the bed. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. I stopped behind him. I chose this, I told myself. I am not a victim. I am making a choice. I reached out a trembling hand and placed it on his shoulder. His muscles were rigid beneath the soft fabric of his shirt. He did not move. He did not even seem to breathe. For a long, terrible moment, I thought I had made a mistake. Then, slowly, he covered my hand with his. His skin was warm. His grip was firm, not crushing. "Just there. Mine if you choose it," he said so quietly it was almost a thought. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he wasn't talking about the bed. He was talking about himself. The night did not unfold as I had braced myself for. There was no roughness, no cold transaction of flesh. There was only a continuation of that unnerving, watchful stillness. He moved with a deliberate grace that seemed to contradict the world he inhabited. Every gesture was measured, every touch freighted with a meaning I could not decipher. He turned to face me, his hands still covering mine. He studied my face in the bruised gold light from the city, his dark eyes searching for something. A crack in the facade. A tremor of true feeling. I am fine, I wanted to say, the reflexive shield I had used my whole life. But the words wouldn't come. The lie was too large to fit in the space between us. He raised his other hand, slowly, as if not to startle an animal. He tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers brushed my skin. A touch so light it was like a current of electricity. It was the first tender gesture I had received from anyone in a very long time. It almost broke me. I didn't cry. I had learned long ago that tears were a currency I couldn't afford to spend. Instead, I held my breath. I simply endured the strange, painful kindness of it. Later, in the dark, with the sound of the distant city humming below and the scent of coming rain in the air, he was just as restrained. It was an intimacy of proximity, of shared silence. He held me, but it was not the embrace of a lover. It was the hold of a man anchoring himself to something. I was an object, yes, but not in the way I had feared. I was a touchstone, a fixed point in his sterile, silent world. I lay awake for hours after his breathing had evened out into sleep, my body rigid, my mind racing. I was cataloging the details of the room, the faint scent of sandalwood and clean linen, the precise angle of the shadows on the ceiling. I was trying to understand what had just happened. He had bought me, but he hadn't truly taken me. He had claimed me, but his claim was a quiet, possessive holding, not a violation. It was more confusing, more unsettling, than any brutality would have been. I finally drifted into a shallow, restless sleep. I dreamt of ghost orchids, their pale flowers luminous in a dark, humid greenhouse, their roots clinging to nothing but air. I woke just before dawn. The sky was a soft, bruised gray. A gentle rain was falling, streaking the vast windows. He was already awake, sitting in a chair by the window, watching the rain. He was dressed again, in the same dark clothes as the night before. He didn't seem to have slept at all. He turned his head when I stirred. His face was unreadable as always. "You came," he said. It sounded like an accusation and a relief all at once. I sat up, pulling the sheet around me. My robe was neatly folded on the end of the bed. I didn't know what to say. The script for this morning did not exist. I had expected to wake up alone, with an envelope of cash on the nightstand and the feeling of being used. Not this. Not his continued, watchful presence. "Mrs. On will bring breakfast at 7, he said, standing up. "There is a car waiting for you downstairs whenever you are ready." It was a dismissal. Clean, efficient, just as I should have expected. A wave of something that felt strangely like disappointment washed over me. I crushed it immediately. This was what I wanted. To be done. To be free. "I am fine," I said, the words finally finding their voice. It was a lie and we both knew it. He gave that small, almost nod. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. "My security chief, Mr. Choi, has your new number. If you have any trouble with Mr. Park, or anyone else, you will call it." It was not a suggestion. It was an order. And then he was gone. The door closed with a soft click, and the silence rushed back in, but it was a different silence now. It was an empty silence. At exactly 7, a soft knock came at the door. An older woman with kind eyes and a placid face entered, pushing a small cart. "Mrs. On." She didn't speak, just smiled a small, discreet smile as she set up a tray with rice porridge, kimchi, and tea. She laid out a fresh set of clothes for me, simple, elegant, and again precisely my size. As she was leaving, she paused and turned back. "Mr. Kong chose the tea himself," she said softly. "It is good for calming the spirit." Then she bowed and left me alone. I drank the tea. It was warm and fragrant, with a hint of chamomile. I told myself it was meaningless. A host's gesture. A detail managed by an efficient housekeeper. But I thought of him standing by the window in the gray light, watching the rain. I thought of him asking about my favorite flower. I thought of the warmth of his hand on mine. These were not the actions of a man concluding a simple transaction. I left the penthouse at 8:15. Downstairs, a black sedan was waiting at the curb, the same model that had brought me here. Mr. Choi stood beside it, holding an umbrella. He opened the door for me. He still did not speak. As I got in, he handed me a small, plain white card. On it was a single phone number. I didn't look at it. I just put it in my pocket. The drive back to my small apartment was silent. The city looked different, washed clean by the rain. I felt like I was seeing it through new eyes. Or maybe I was the one who had been changed. When I got to my apartment, there was an envelope slid under the door. Not from him, from my landlord. It was a notice that my rent had been paid in full for the next 6 months. I sank onto the floor of my hallway, the letter in my hand, and finally, I cried. Not for the humiliation or the fear. I cried because I didn't understand. I had paid my debt. I was supposed to be free, but it felt like I had just incurred a new one with no clear terms and no obvious price. A debt of a different kind, held by a man who spoke in silence and paid in orchids. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks in which I tried to stitch my life back together. The first thing I did was go to my flower shop. The legal notices were gone. The locks had been changed, but a new set of keys was waiting for me at the building manager's office, left by a Mr. Choi. The interior was as the thugs had left it, a mess of overturned buckets, scattered soil, and broken stems. It smelled of decay. I spent 2 days cleaning, scrubbing the floors, throwing out the dead and dying things. It was a kind of penance, a way to reclaim the space as my own. On the 3rd day, I ordered new flowers. The wholesaler was surprisingly deferential. My line of credit, which had been frozen, was suddenly open again, larger than before. I did not have to ask why. I knew. The black sedan was always there. It wasn't obvious. It would be parked a block away from my apartment in the morning, and 2 blocks from my shop in the evening. A different driver sometimes, but the car was the same. I never used it. I took the bus. I walked. I insisted on the small, familiar routines of my old life. It was a petty rebellion, a way of saying, you do not own me. I'm not sure the message was received. Felt more like shouting into the wind. Lena came to the shop the day the first shipment of new flowers arrived. She hugged me hard. Mina, my God, you disappeared. I was so worried. She looked around the clean, empty space, then at the boxes of fresh blooms. What happened? The sharks. They just went away. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't say the words. I sold a night of my life to a man scarier than they were. So I gave her a version of it. I found a private investor. He cleared the debt. It was alone. I hated the lie. Felt flimsy and cheap. Lena, bless her, didn't push. She just saw the shadows under my eyes. Is he okay? This investor. I'm fine, I said, the old refrain. It's just business. She helped me unpack the flowers, her cheerful chatter filling the empty space. We filled buckets with water, snipped stems, arranged the bright heads of peonies and ranunculus into displays. For a few hours it felt normal. Felt like before. So, are you going to see this investor again? She asked, casually, as she stripped the leaves from a rose stem. No, I said too quickly. The arrangement is concluded, past tense. Final. She gave me a look. Lena had always been able to read me better than anyone. Okay, she said, letting it drop, but I saw the doubt in her eyes. I told myself it was concluded. I repeated it every morning when I saw the black car. I repeated it every time a supplier was a little too eager to please. I repeated it every night when I lay in my own bed, in my own small apartment, and felt the ghost of his stillness in the room. I was lying and I knew it. The proof arrived on a Tuesday. It was a large, flat box, delivered by a courier who looked terrified to be handing it to me. There was no note. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a framed botanical print. It was an antique, hand-colored engraving of Dendrophylax lindinii, the ghost orchid. It was exquisite. It was thoughtful. And it was a violation. It was a message sent directly into the heart of my life, a reminder that he knew me. He remembered. I stared at it for a full 10 minutes, my heart hammering. This was not clearing a debt. This was not concluding an arrangement. This was something else. Something I had no name for. I couldn't keep it. To accept it would be to accept the new terms of our relationship, whatever they were. It would be a surrender. I repacked the box carefully. The next morning, I walked out of my apartment building and straight to the black sedan parked down the street. The driver's window slid down as I approached. It wasn't Mr. Choi. It was a younger man with the same impassive expression. "I need you to give this to Mr. Kong," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I held out the box. The driver did not take it. He looked past me, and I turned to see Mr. Choi approaching from the corner, as if summoned from the air itself. He stopped in front of me. His face was, as ever, a mask of stoic professionalism. He looked at the box in my hands, then at my face. "There is a problem, Miss On?" His voice was a low rumble. "This is not my property," I said. "Please return it." He did not move to take it. He simply stood there, a bulwark of quiet refusal. "Mr. Kong does not accept returns," he said. It was a simple statement of fact. "I am not his." "Anything?" I said, my voice rising slightly. "I will not be managed. I will not be sent gifts as if I am some kept woman. The debt is paid." I felt a flush of heat in my face. It was all coming out now. The frustration, the confusion, the suffocating sense of being watched and handled. Mr. Choi's expression did not change. He did not argue. He did not try to persuade me. He just waited for the storm to pass. After a few seconds of heavy silence, he spoke again. "It is a gift," he said, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "It is meant to be received. I don't want it. That does not change its nature." He finally reached out, and his hands gently pushed the box back towards me. "Keep it, Miss On, or throw it away. The gesture has already been made." He gave a short, formal bow, turned and walked away. The driver's window slid up. The car remained. I was left standing on the sidewalk, holding a box containing a memory I didn't want and a message I couldn't refuse. He was not letting me go. He was simply waiting. The realization was a cold dread that settled deep in my bones. I was a loose thread he was refusing to snip. He was slowly, patiently, weaving me into a tapestry I couldn't see, and I was powerless to stop him. That night, I hung the print on the wall opposite my bed. It was a declaration of war. Or maybe it was just the first white flag of my surrender. I wasn't sure which. December arrived, bringing a sharp, biting cold that seeped through the window frames of my old apartment. The flower shop was doing well. Too well. Orders came in from corporate clients I had never solicited, for amounts that made my hands shake as I wrote the invoices. I knew where they came from. Each one felt like another golden thread in the web he was spinning around me. I worked constantly. I filled the shop with the scent of pine and winter berries, creating wreaths and arrangements for the holidays. I worked until my fingers were numb and my back ached. I worked so I would be too tired to think, too tired to lie awake at night and feel the weight of his invisible presence. I had not heard from him directly since that morning. 6 weeks of silence. 6 weeks of being managed from a distance by his silent operatives. I told myself I was getting used to it. I was adapting. I was carving out a space for my own life within the larger territory he had claimed. I even started using the car. It began on a night of freezing rain. The last bus had just pulled away, and I was facing a 30-minute walk in the icy downpour. The black sedan was there, as always, pulled up to the curb, and the back door opened. A silent invitation. I stood there for a full minute, the rain soaking my coat, my pride warring with the bone-deep chill. Finally, I got in. The interior was warm and silent. The driver, the young one, didn't speak. He just drove me home. After that, I started taking it more often. Only when it was late. Only when I was tired. I rationalized it. It was practical. It was safe. But I knew, every time I slid onto the soft leather seat, that it was another small concession. Another inch of ground ceded. The call from Lena came on a Thursday. Her voice was bright, excited. "Mina, I have a date with this amazing guy I met, and he wants to take me to this place, Elysian. Have you heard of it?" It's supposed to be impossible to get into. We're going Saturday. You should come with us. Bring a date. My heart stopped. Elysian. I had heard of it. It was a members-only club, a discreet playground for the city's elite. It was also one of the few places Kang Daehyun was known to frequent. Coincidence? It had to be. Lena, I can't. I'm so busy with the shop. Nonsense. You need a night off. Please? For me? I'm nervous. I want my best friend there for backup. I could hear the real plea in her voice. She was genuinely anxious about this date. I thought about the silent apartment, the long, empty evening ahead. I thought about the ghost orchid on my wall. Maybe it would be good to go out, to be normal, to be in a crowd. What were the chances he would even be there? Almost zero. I told myself the lie and found that I believed it. Okay, I said, but I'm not bringing a date. Saturday arrived. I dressed carefully. A simple black dress, elegant but unassuming. I wanted to be invisible. I took the sedan. I felt a pang of hypocrisy as it pulled up to the club's discreet, unmarked entrance, but I ignored it. Lena was waiting inside, her face lit up. Her date, a handsome man in a well-cut suit, was charming. They were a good match. The club was exactly what you'd expect. Dark wood, low amber lighting, hushed conversations. The air hummed with power and money. We were led to a small table in a corner. For an hour it was fine. I drank a glass of wine. I smiled at the right times. I played the part of the supportive friend. I was starting to relax. That was my first mistake. Then I saw him. He wasn't in the main room. He was in a glass-walled private area on a slightly raised level, looking down on the rest of us like a king from his throne room. He was with two other men, older, serious. A meeting. He wasn't looking in my direction. He probably hadn't even seen me. I felt a sudden, desperate urge to flee. I could make an excuse. A headache. An early morning. Lena would understand. But I was frozen. My feet were rooted to the floor. It was as if a magnetic force was holding me in my chair. He laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was the ghost of one. A slight upward tick of his lips in response to something one of the men said. It was the most animated I had ever seen him. And then, as if he could feel my eyes on him, he lifted his head. His gaze swept the room, cool and disinterested, passed over me, and then it came back. For 2 seconds, his eyes locked with mine across the crowded, noisy room. The world fell away. The music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses. It all disappeared. There was only the intense, unnerving focus of his gaze. There was no surprise in his eyes. No anger. There was nothing. Just a flat, bottomless recognition. Then he gave the slightest of nods, a barely perceptible dip of his chin, and turned back to his companions as if nothing had happened. The moment was over. But it had happened. He had seen me. He had acknowledged me. In his world of subtle signals and coded gestures, that nod was a declaration. It was a reassertion of his claim, made not in private, but in public. My face was burning. I felt like everyone in the room must have seen it, must have understood. Lena touched my arm. Mina, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I looked at her happy, normal face, and a chasm opened up between us. Our worlds were no longer the same. I'm fine, I said, but the lie had never sounded so hollow. A few minutes later, a waiter approached our table, holding a silver tray with a single glass on it. It was a whiskey, the same amber color as the one he'd had in his penthouse. The waiter placed it in front of me. From Mr. Kong, he murmured, and retreated. It was a checkmate, a move I could not counter. To refuse it would be a scene. To accept it was to confirm everything his nod had implied. I looked up at the glass room. He was watching me again, waiting. I picked up the glass. My hand was perfectly steady. I met his eyes and I took a sip. The whiskey was smoky and smooth. It burned all the way down, tasted like surrender. The week that followed the incident at the club was quiet. Too quiet. The air itself seemed to be holding its breath. The black sedan was still there, a constant, silent sentinel. Mr. Choi was nowhere to be seen. I threw myself into work, creating elaborate, almost frantic arrangements of winter roses and frosted holly. I was building a fortress of beauty around myself, a barricade against the encroaching reality of my situation. I told myself the whiskey at the club was the end of it. A final, public seal on our arrangement. He had made his point. Now perhaps he would finally leave me alone. I knew, even as I arranged the delicate petals of a white cyclamen, that I was only fooling myself. The attack came not with a bang, but with a whisper. It started with a phone call to the shop. A blocked number. I answered, expecting a customer. The voice on the other end was rough, gravelly.
On Mina.
Yes. Who is this? A friend of Mr. Park's. He's an old-fashioned man. He doesn't believe his accounts can be settled by third parties. He feels disrespected, a cold knot formed in my stomach. The debt was handled. Was it? The voice was laced with a chilling amusement. Some things can't be bought off. A pretty flower girl like you should know that. Some things just have to be plucked. The line went dead. I stood there, the receiver clutched in my hand, my blood running cold. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about pride. Mr. Park, the man whose associates I had first owed, was refusing to be sidelined. He was challenging Kang Dae-hyun, using me as the pawn. I should have called the number Mr. Choi had given me. I know this now. It was the logical, sensible thing to do. But my own pride, my fierce, stupid desire for autonomy, got in the way. This was my problem. I had brought this into his world. I would handle it. I would not be the frightened woman running to her keeper. That was my second mistake. I did nothing. I told no one. I went home and locked my door, my heart pounding with a rhythm of dread. I spent a sleepless night jumping at every creak of the old building. The next day I went to the shop. I opened up as usual. I told myself the call was a bluff, an empty threat meant to scare me. For most of the day it seemed I was right. The hours passed uneventfully. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the street. I was just starting to pack up, my shoulders finally unknotting from the tension that had held them rigid all day. And then they came. 2 of them. They weren't the quiet, bureaucratic types who had come before. These men were built for blunt force. They didn't say anything. They just started breaking things. Not me. They never touched me. That was the most terrifying part. It was a cold, deliberate destruction. One of them swept a row of finished arrangements off the counter, sending glass and water and petals scattering across the floor. The other kicked over a display of potted ferns, the sound of shattering ceramic loud in the small space. I was backed against the wall, my throat tight with a scream that wouldn't come out. This was faster, more brutal than I had imagined. Short, sharp sentences of violence. Overturned tables. Smashed windows. The scent of crushed green stems and damp earth filled the air. It was over in less than 2 minutes. They looked at the wreckage, then at me. One of them smiled, a cruel, thin slash in his face. "A message from Mr. Park," he said. "Next time, it won't be the flowers." Then they were gone. I slid down the wall, my legs giving out from under me. I was surrounded by the ruins of my beautiful, fragile fortress. I was shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage. Rage at Mr. Park. Rage at Ji-hoon for bringing this into my life. And rage at myself for my foolish pride. I don't know how long I sat there. 5 minutes. 10. The sound of the door opening again made me flinch violently. I looked up, expecting them to be back. It was Mr. Choi. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. His face, for the first time since I had met him, showed a flicker of something other than placid control. It was a cold, hard anger. He walked over to me, his footsteps crunching on broken glass. He didn't offer a hand. He just stood over me. "Are you hurt?" His voice was tight. I shook my head, unable to speak. He pulled out his phone and spoke 2 words into it. "It's done." He listened for a moment, then said, "Yes, she is safe." He snapped the phone shut and looked down at me. "We're leaving." I found my voice. "This is my shop. You have to do nothing. He cut me off, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is a crime scene. Our people will handle it, our people. The words hung in the air. He helped me to my feet, his grip on my arm firm and steady. He led me out of the wreckage of my shop and into the waiting black sedan. The city lights smeared past the window. I didn't see them. I saw the broken petals on the floor. I saw the cruel smile on the man's face. I saw the complete and utter failure of my independence. We drove in silence. We were not going to my apartment. I knew with a sinking certainty where we were going. Back to the tower. Back to him. When the car stopped, we were in a private underground garage. Mr. Choi led me to the same small, private elevator as before. The ride up was a long, silent ascent into the sky. My anger had cooled into a hard, heavy dread. I was about to face the man whose protection I had scorned, and whose property had just been vandalized. The elevator doors opened into the penthouse. He was there, standing by the window, just as he had been the first night. He was on the phone. He didn't turn, but I heard his voice, and it was a sound I had never heard before. It was perfectly calm, perfectly level, and it was the most dangerous sound I had ever heard in my life. "No," he said. "Not his son. Him. I want him to understand what happens when you touch something that is mine." He hung up the phone with a quiet click. He did not turn around. He just stood there, a silhouette against the vast, glittering tapestry of Seoul at night. The silence in the room was absolute, a dense, pressurized thing. It was the silence before a storm breaks. Mr. Choi had remained by the elevator, a statue in a dark suit. He gave a slight bow in Kang Dae-hyun's direction, and then the elevator doors slid shut, leaving me alone with him. I was still standing just inside the entrance, my coat damp, my hair probably a mess. I could smell the cloying scent of crushed flowers clinging to me. I felt like a piece of wreckage washed up in his pristine, orderly world. I should have been afraid. Part of me was. The man whose quiet voice had just passed a sentence on another human being was terrifying. But the anger I had felt on the floor of my shop was still there, a hard, hot coal in my chest. This was his fault. His claim on me. His silent, possessive gestures had been a red flag to his rivals. He had painted a target on my back. He finally spoke, his back still to me. His voice was low, controlled. "You did not call." It was a simple statement of fact, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. It was my problem to handle. I shot back, my voice trembling slightly but laced with defiance. "Was it?" He turned then, slowly. His face was a mask of cold fury. It was all in his eyes. They were like black ice. "Look at you. Look at what they did to your shop. Did you handle it on Mina?" The use of my full name was like a slap. He walked towards me, and for the first time, I felt a physical tremor of fear. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator. He stopped a few feet from me, his eyes scanning me from head to toe, checking for damage. The intensity of his gaze was a physical force. "He put his hands on you?"
No, iwisparat.
"They just broke things. They broke things that belong to you," he corrected me, his voice dangerously soft. "Which means they broke things that belong to me. There is no difference." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it stole my breath. "I don't belong to you," I said, the words coming out stronger than I felt. "I am not a possession. I am not a line item in your ledger that you get to protect for your own pride." And almost smile. But this one had no warmth, no amusement. It was sharp and cruel. "Pride," he said, the word dripping with contempt. "You think this is about pride? This is about order. This is about a man who was given a warning and chose to ignore it. He tested a boundary. He will now learn where that boundary lies." He was so certain, so absolute, the master of his universe, moving pieces on a board I couldn't even see. The injustice of it, the complete lack of consideration for my own will, my own life, made something inside me snap. "You did this," I heard myself say, my voice rising. "You and your stupid, silent games. The car, the gifts, that drink at the club. You might as well have painted a sign on my door that said, 'Property of Kang Dae-hyun.' You invited this. You wanted this to happen. I was breathing heavily, my chest tight. The words hung in the air between us, a raw, ugly accusation. I had finally said what I had been thinking for weeks. I had challenged the king in his castle. He just stared at me. His anger seemed to recede, replaced by that unnerving, analytical stillness. He was taking my words apart, examining them. The silence stretched for a full minute. I counted. 63 seconds of the loudest silence I had ever known. When he spoke again, his voice was different. The cold fury was gone. In its place was something else. Something that sounded almost like weariness. You think I wanted this, he said. It wasn't a question. It was him trying on the idea, seeing how it fit. He shook his head, a small, sharp movement. I did not want you to be frightened. I did not want your world to be broken. Then what did you want? I cried, my frustration boiling over. Why not just pay the debt and leave me alone? He took a step closer. And another. He was standing right in front of me now, so close I could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. So close I could feel the heat coming off his body. His eyes held mine, and for the first time I saw something beyond the control, beyond the power. I saw a flicker of raw, unguarded honesty. A crack in the marble facade. Because I can't, he said. The two words were so quiet, so freighted with a meaning I couldn't grasp, that they stunned me into silence. He reached up, his movements as slow and deliberate as they had been that first night. He didn't tuck a strand of hair this time. He cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. The gesture was possessive, yes, but it was also exquisitely tender. It was a contradiction I couldn't resolve. Every morning, he said, his voice a low murmur. I wake up, and the first thing I think is she safe? I sent the car because the streets are not safe. I paid the rent because a landlord can be a vulnerability. I sent the orchid because I remembered what you said, and I wanted you to have something beautiful that was not broken. His confession was not a flood of emotion. It was a series of facts, a list of evidence submitted for my consideration. He was laying himself bare in the only way he knew how. Terse, declarative, certain. You are not a debt, Mina, he said, his thumb brushing my lower lip. You were never the transaction. You were the reason for it, the world tilted on its axis. All my theories, all my carefully constructed defenses, they all crumbled into dust. This wasn't about power or pride or ownership in the way I understood it. This was something else entirely. Something more dangerous. Something I was terrifyingly unprepared for. He was not a man who managed his possessions. He was a man who protected what he valued. And he valued me. The weight of his confession settled in the space between us. I stood there, his hand warm against my jaw, my mind struggling to process his words. Because I can't leave you alone. It wasn't a declaration of love, not in any way I had ever heard or read about. It was a statement of fact, like saying the sky is blue or water is wet. It was an admission of a fundamental, unchangeable truth of his existence. He had tried to manage it from a distance, with his silent protectors and anonymous gifts. He had tried to contain his interest within the cold logic of his world. But the attack on my shop had broken that containment. It had forced his hand. I finally found my voice, a mere whisper. Mr. Park is a memory, he said, his tone final. There was no menace in it, just an absolute certainty that wiped the man from existence. He will not trouble you again. The casual way he could erase a person from the world was terrifying. But beneath the fear, a different feeling was taking root. A profound, unsettling sense of safety. He had drawn a circle of absolute protection around me, and the violence of his world would now be turned outward, away from me, to preserve that circle. He was still holding my face, his dark eyes searching mine. He was waiting for a verdict, for a reaction. The power in the room had shifted. It was no longer his. It was mine. I had the one thing he couldn't control. My choice. I could run from this. I could thank him, walk out that door, and try to build a life in the shadow of his unwanted protection. Or I could stay. I could step into the circle willingly. I could accept the terrifying, beautiful, dangerous truth of what he was offering. Not a cage, but a fortress. And he would be locked inside it with me. I didn't know what to do. My entire life had been about self-reliance, about building my own small, safe spaces. To surrender that, to trust someone else with my safety, felt like a betrayal of the person I had fought so hard to become. I am fine, I told myself, the old, useless mantra. I can handle this. I knew, even as I thought it, that I was lying. I was not fine, and I could not handle this alone. He seemed to sense my turmoil. He dropped his hand, stepping back, giving me space. The loss of his touch was a sudden coldness. "Mrs. On has prepared the guest room," he said, his voice once again carefully neutral. "You will stay here tonight. It is not safe at your apartment." He turned and walked towards his study. "Dae-hyun," I said. His name. I had never said it aloud before. Felt foreign and powerful on my tongue. He stopped, his back to me. He didn't turn, but I saw his shoulders tense. He was waiting. I took a breath. "The first night, you offered me a choice. The guest room or your bed." He turned around slowly. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were dark with an intense, focused attention. "Yes," he said. "Is the offer still standing?" I asked. The question hung in the air. Cost me everything to ask it. All my pride, all my fear. It was my turn to lay my cards on the table. A long silence stretched. 3 seconds. 4. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. I had misread everything. I had made a terrible mistake. Then he spoke. "The offer is permanent," he said. "And it is not for the bed. It is for this house. For my life. Mine if you choose it." There it was again. That phrase. Mine if you choose it. It wasn't a demand. It was a question. The most important question I would ever be asked. He was offering me everything. The danger, the silence, the cold power, and the strange, fierce tenderness that lay beneath it. All of it. All of him. I thought of my ruined shop. I thought of the ghost orchid on my wall. I thought of the profound loneliness of my independence. I had been fighting so hard to be left alone, and I had never felt more alone than I did in that moment. I walked towards him. I stopped just before him, and I looked up into his face. I was not a victim. I was not a transaction. I was a woman making a choice. "I'm fine," I said softly. It was the first time I had ever said the words to him and had them be the truth. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. The first true one I had ever seen. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was warm and firm. And for the first time it did not feel like a claim. Felt like an anchor. He led me not to the bedroom, but to a different part of the penthouse I hadn't seen. He slid open a heavy wooden door, revealing a staircase spiraling upwards. "There is something I want to show you," he said. He led me up the stairs. At the top, another door. He opened it, and we stepped out into a world of impossible green. It was a greenhouse, a vast, glass-domed conservatory at the very peak of the tower, hidden from the world. The air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming things. And everywhere I looked, there were orchids. Hundreds of them. Cattleya, Paphiopedilum, and in a special climate-controlled section, a dozen ghost orchids, their spectral white flowers floating in the air, just as I had dreamed. He had built a secret living world in the heart of his sterile concrete kingdom. I turned to look at him. He was watching my face, gauging my reaction. "I grow them," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "They require patience, a specific environment. They cannot be rushed." He was not talking about the flowers. He was talking about me. He was telling me he understood. He knew I needed time and quiet and the right conditions to heal, to trust. I walked over to the ghost orchids. I reached out and gently touched a petal. It was as soft and fragile as a moth's wing. "They're beautiful," I whispered. "Yes," he said, coming to stand beside me. "They are." We stood there for a long time, in the warm, living silence of his secret garden. The city a distant, forgotten memory below. The choice had been made. The river of my life had not just been diverted. It had found a new, deeper channel. And I was no longer fighting the current. I did not leave the penthouse. The days that followed were a strange, quiet education. I lived in the spaces between the moments of his life. He would disappear for hours, sometimes for a whole day, into the city, into the world of meetings and coded conversations that I was not a part of. Mr. Choi would drive him, his face a granite mask.